image of the so-called tholus. And again, this is something you have to project in your head a little bit, but what you have is a circular mound, another level, and then on top you have this shape. And that shape is rounded and eroded, but again, it looks, see, straight line there, straight line there, straight line there. This used to be a tetrahedral shape. So the tip of the tholus was in fact a pyramid shape at one time. And again, all the facets of that pyramid, guess what? They point to other objects at Cydonia that appear to be artificial. Okay, here's the D&M pyramid, taken from the European Space Agency's Mars Express image. They took 2 stereo images and put them together to make 3D. Here it is from the back side. And again, you can see a facet there, a face there. These are all sort of triangular faces of pyramids. It's weird. You know what's weird is that the images are getting compressed sideways on the projector from what I'm seeing on my screen. I wish we could fix that. It's too late. Here's another example of the D&M. Now, if you flew over this in a helicopter, it's a pyramid. You're going to assume this thing is a pyramid. It's not going to occur to you that it's anything but an artificial structure, I don't think, because it looks just like a pyramid. Here's partial, this little guy over here. They also did some 3D stuff on the face on Mars, and what they found was, once again, that although this is a little bit distorted, it looks pretty much like a face. This side is more damaged or different from that side. Here it is from the other perspective. But what's really interesting is that as you look at the European Space Agency version, see these? Anybody see those striations there, that straight line stuff? It looks like stuff. It looks like beams or something embedding into the ground. That's not visible on any of the NASA photography. It's only visible on the European Space Agency stuff. Here's the D&M pyramid from European Space Agency. And again, I think you can see these lines, and if you extend them and assume there's a cross line there, you've got basically a triangular structure. Here's the other little guy. We keep talking about this tetrahedral ruin. This is what it used to look like. There, see if you just extend those. It's all broken, but that's probably what it looked like from perspective. See that face there? So we got to later space probes like Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and they started taking, or sorry, Mars Observer. That's Mars Observer. They started taking later images. As we were building up to Mars Observer in 1993, Hoagland debated Dr. Bevan French, who was the director of the Mars Observer program. And it was supposed to have a camera that would be good enough to decide once and for all whether the face on Mars was artificial. Dr. French lost the debate. Okay? And in fact, this guy eventually said, look, Dr. French, if these people are nuts, why don't you just take the pictures and prove to everybody that they're nuts? After this interview was concluded, after this debate was concluded, and Hoagland clearly won, 3 minutes later, NASA announced that the Mars Observer spacecraft had been missing for the previous 14 hours. So what that means is that this guy, this project manager, knew when he went on TV that the space probe had been lost, but he didn't mention that on TV. So what that implies to me is they wanted to put him out there and see if he could quash the whole thing and win the debate. When he lost, they decided to tell people, well, guess what? We lost Mars Observer. This is the only picture of Mars that Mars Observer ever took. Wow. Now, again, people have said, you know, so what? But here's what it could have, if they'd taken Mars Observer black, and there's a whole thing about how they could have transmitted images back with nobody else finding it. Guess what it would have done? It would have given them the opportunity to take pictures of Cydonia, the face on Mars, anything else on Mars like the Inca City that they wanted to take pictures of, without anybody even suspecting those pictures existed, so that they would know what we would get to see when we sent a probe eventually later on to take better pictures. So it gave them a 5-year head start, because it took us another 5 years to get to Mars, to know what was down there on the ground, what the true ground truth was. Okay. In between time, we went back to Mars with our first probe. It was called Mars Pathfinder. Cool, cute little thing, first rover. It was about that big. had cameras and stuff. Guess what? It was shaped like a tetrahedron, which I have always found interesting. And guess what? The landing site was 19.5 degrees. So again, this same tetrahedral motif thing comes out. They're sending a tetrahedral lander to land on Mars at 19.5 degrees. The other latitude was 33 degrees, which is, longitude was 33 degrees, which is Masonic. And again, lots of NASA guys are Freemasons. It's all in dark mission. When they got to the landing site, again, they took pictures of the area, and there were these two peaks that they called the Twin Peaks, which looked like they might have once at one time been pyramids. And again, the sky was kind of Technicolor red, but in fact, it's a light blue. When they first started sending pictures back, and I remember this, Hoagland makes a big deal out of this, and some people have claimed this is not the case. I wish he'd put the video on YouTube, but you know, when they first started broadcasting pictures from Mars Pathfinder, people started calling up and saying, well, what are those things in the foreground? They look like boxes and they look like machinery. It doesn't look like rocks. And they actually mentioned it on the air. John Holloman, who at the time was a CNN reporter, actually brought this up on the air. They were like, wow, that's really weird stuff. What is that? Well, here's one little piece of an object which looks like, I don't know, capstone of a pyramid, maybe? Am I losing anybody with this? I mean, I can see this instantly in 3D, but a lot of people can't. I understand. If you can't see it, I get it. But just download the pictures, go, you know, look at them. Hopefully, you'll eventually see it. Here's one of the objects that they did broadcast on TV that day. Now, I want to see what it looks like on the screen. That's not a rock. That's not a rock. This is just off the lip. That is actually the Pathfinder pedal right there. This is a square box. This is the interior of this thing is eroded away, but this is, see this here, line, this repetitive repeating pattern, and that's kind of like a cone shape, comes out this way. That's like a flywheel or something. I mean, as an engineer, I look at that and I'm just like, okay, dude, that's mechanical engineering. And then what they did is when they released these pictures eventually on the web, that picture was actually taken off the TV broadcast by Hoagie. Then when they released it on the web, they had several different pictures that could have viewed it, and they misregistered the different color, and then in one case they just put wallpaper right over the top of it, so you couldn't see it. Oh, here's the color version of the same object. You can still kind of see the flywheel pattern in there, but this is what they did to it. They deliberately misregistered. See, what they did is they took 3 different pictures, red, green, and blue filters, and then they overlay them. And apparently at NASA, they're not able to overlay them properly because they seem to come out with misalignments right over the stuff that you think is really interesting and you really want to look at in close-up. Here's 2 other images of it. Again, misregistration problems, but I hope you can kind of see this conical shape in here. This is what Hoagie called the gyro. It's right off there. And again, this is kind of my comparison. Sort of fan blades, maybe, and then kind of a cone-shaped center thing, like a jet engine. That's a jet engine. Not exactly perfect, but you know, it's hard to find. It's hard to find artificial Martian architecture pictures on the web. It's really not that easy. Here's my favorite one. That's a Pathfinder image. This is an image from the Viking lander in 1976. So 21 years later, apparently our cameras have gotten a whole lot worse. Now, I want to tell you one other story real quick. I don't know how's our time. I'm going to tell you this story really quickly. Okay, we're really dead. I was with Hoagland in Pasadena during the whole Pathfinder thing when it was coming out, and he was doing a presentation on this stuff. And a guy walked up, and he said he was from JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he had pictures like these. And he was showing them to Richard, and I was looking over his shoulder. And they were 1,000 times better than this or this. They were beautiful, pristine, perfect. And he was saying things like, we were wondering when you were going to find this one. You know, and he was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then the guy said, oh, you know what? This is, again, during a break like we just had. The guy said, oh, you know what? I better mark my, you know, there's some stamps on the back. I better mark my ID off there so nobody can trace them back to me. And so Hoagland said, okay. And he gave it to the guy. And somebody else asked the question. We're both looking like this. I turned around. The guy was gone. And the pictures went with it. Wow. But they were, I saw the pictures with my own eyes. They were incredible. So I know this is not really the truth. So again, here you have the Twin Peaks near the Pathfinder landing site. And you just cannot see. Can you see this? This is really not good enough contrast, but there's kind of a cross-hatching pattern on both of them. Nah, it's not so good on the projector. Again, see this cross-hatching kind of pattern that's going on here? Can you see that guy right there? Yeah. Anybody have, can anybody shout out what do you think that looks like? Anybody have an opinion?
With Sphinx.
Yeah, anybody who didn't read any of my articles about this? Does it look like a Sphinx? Because I thought it looked like a Sphinx. And I wrote an article on it and I got ripped apart. What this, again, there's this pattern of dark stuff and squares, and it looked to me like ruins. Just like, and again, God, it looks beautiful on my computer. See the layer there, layer there, layer there on this thing, and it's very similar to this kind of stuff here. Yeah, I really got a lot of compression there. This one's a little clearer. You can see this pattern of like inhabitants there. There's people, there's condos there. And it's got a Sphinx guarding it out front. And this, I think, is part of a wall that might be behind the thing. I think this is the shape of the body. There's a paw behind it. So in other words, what sphinxes are used for is to guard temples. And it looks like you got a sphinx guarding this temple. If we go back a couple steps. Do I have it now? Maybe it's down here. Again, pyramid, pyramid, sphinx, sphinx. This is how I drew it up in a CAD system. Actually, it's really awesome. The Sphinx actually looks better on the projector than it looks on my computer. I'm digging that. Something to keep in mind. Here's a grayscale version. Maybe you can see this pattern a little bit better. How I see it. Doesn't belong there. Then you have all this other stuff at the Pathfinder landing site that look kind of like rocks, but might not really be rocks. They've got this kind of funny pattern to them, and again, they have growths all over them. Here's one of my favorites. This is called the hydrant. The guys at the Near Pathfinder Anomalies Association found this. You know, if that's not a piece of junk rather than a rock, I don't really know what it is. There's a spoke there. So the question became is, where's the Sphinx? Is it just some rocks that are close up to the camera, or is it a large structure farther away? Well, when we got Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, I was kind of hoping that we would be able to see that there was a Sphinx there. Well, we didn't see there was a Sphinx, but I saw something. Guess what? Right between the two Twin Peaks, right where it would be ceremonially if it was supposed to be a Sphinx protecting those two pyramids, there was something there. There's a darkness there. There's the Pathfinder. So everything lined up. The view from the camera lined up just perfectly. But as we got in closer and closer, what I found is there ain't no Sphinx there. It's just a trench. And again, I looked at the grayscale around here, and there's very little detail in it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that they erased the thing, but I kind of think they erased the thing. You can take that or leave it. There's no conclusive evidence from orbit that that Sphinx is really there, except from what we saw from the ground truth. But this, unfortunately, that's where it would be. So I have a feeling that this just doesn't look right to me. It looks like somebody drew in it, but I can't prove it. So again, here's a difference between NASA's processed image and the European Space Agency. In the European Space Agency version, you can see layer, 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 see that? And then vertical, 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 little blocks, block houses built into the side of this thing. Here's a European Space Agency version of a panorama of the Pathfinder landing site with the Twin Peaks in the background. There's my Sphinx, my alleged Sphinx. And there's a bunch of stuff that's in here in the foreground. And notice it's different color. It's very blue. The sky color is a lot better. The first object is right, where is he? He is right in there, I think. And again, this has holes in it, they're spaced regularly. It kind of looks to me like, I don't know, a turbocharger. Looks like a piece of mechanical equipment. Here's the ESA version, here's the NASA version. They don't look the same. Now, this is another area over to the right. It is over this way. See this thing here? Kind of got a little screen there or something, I don't know. All this cross-hatching pattern. And then you see this thing here and this thing here. And again, you're unfortunately getting a little distortion because of the projector. But there's sort of a square shape here, mechanical shape. And this guy here looks completely different than the NASA version because what they've done is they've overlaid misregistered images multiple times. And these two guys don't even exist in the NASA version. They're just gone. Another view of the ESA version. Now, other stuff on Mars. There's lots of other stuff on Mars that's really interesting. One of these is a copper mine in Arizona. And which one do you think is the copper mine in Arizona, by the way? Just out of curiosity. Left one? Yeah. And you can kind of tell because it's kind of squared at the corners. One of them is a crater on Mars. Really, tell me the difference. NASA says this is a grooved crater, and their concept of how it was formed is so contradictory and complex, it's ridiculous. To me, they look exactly the same. Looks like somebody's been doing a little mining work on Mars. Just like, hey, guess what? Just like Zecharia Sitchin said. Right? Here's the grooved crater. Looks like a mine to me. If you put them together, they fit together really well. They could be part of, you know, again, show me the difference. I don't know the difference. Here's a sort of a tube structure on Mars with cross supports. Here's a tube structure on the Earth in California with cross supports. Yeah, here's the... when we waited till 1998 to get pictures of the face on Mars. Okay, this is the first picture of the face on Mars that NASA released in April of 1998. The first one since Viking in 1976.
I don't see nothing.
Yeah, I don't see anything. No, neither did anybody else. This is their processed version of it. This is, again, Art Bell's Catbox version of the face on Mars. This is what prompted Dan Rather to say it's just a pile of rocks. That was right before he used fabricated documents to try to bring down President Bush in 2004, right? Yeah, okay. That's the Catbox version. This one was released. This is the same image, properly enhanced. Still a terrible image, but properly enhanced. Released 3 minutes after all the 6 o'clock newscasts that had shown the other image went off the air. There looks like there might be something in an eyeball right there. A guy named Lan Fleming from NASA actually worked as a NASA contractor, actually went through and tried to recreate the Catbox image from the original source data. The only way he could do it is he used what's called a high-pass filter, a low-pass filter, 3 or 4 other filters, and an embossing filter. What a high-pass filter does is it removes all the high-frequency information. What a low-pass filter does is it removes all the low-frequency information, meaning you've got a very narrow band. What an embossing filter does is it gives you a fake 3D relief, and you can change the directions of the shadows, the light direction, to be anything you want. He had to actually change the lighting from its actual real direction to a completely different direction, actually almost 90 degrees opposite, in order to recreate the same thing. This was a deliberate construction, a deliberate fraud by NASA. So, it doesn't look like anything, because it doesn't look like anything. I mean, you know, here, it shouldn't look like... Here's a 3D reconstruction from ESA versus the Catbox image. There's lots of other stuff at Cydonia. This is a little dome, and notice these little arches here? See those? Digging into the ground? That, again, it's a little compressed on the... See that? Spoke, 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 spoke. The other side's buried. Archway, archway, archway. Okay, again, anybody want to find me something natural on the Earth that looks just like that? I'm all for it. Here are tubes on Mars, coming out of the ground and then bending back down into the ground. They clearly are bent into the ground, buried. Buried up here, buried there. This area has been exposed, all parallel. So there's stuff like this all over images of Mars if you look for it. This is the helicopter landing pad on Mars. Can you see that? See the square there? Square shape, circle. Notice the sun is coming through that. That must be a hole of some kind. Another sort of square shape there. It's just casting a shadow on the surface below it. And if you look really close, you can almost see, if you were here, you walk up this pathway here and then go up the stairs to the top. Can you see that? But it's just natural. Oh, what we were getting to earlier. The face on Mars, did it have an eyeball? NASA said no. Well, this is a picture that they took that specifically targeted the eye on the right side of the face on Mars. Well, not only is it is there an eyebrow, there's an eyeball shape, shaped just like a human eyeball. It even has a little area for the tear duct, and there, right there, is a spherical pupil that NASA said didn't exist. It's not really spherical, it's a kind of a wedge shape. But here's what DiPietro said in 1992, and what we actually found in the images. Here's 3 images of the face from Viking, from Mars Odyssey, and from Mars Express. Again, you can, I hope, see straight line, radius, exactly the same proportions. As we got into the early 2000s, we started sending better probes. We eventually got other pictures of the face on Mars. This was the one, this is the best one from Mars Global Surveyor. It had a resolution of about 14 meters per pixel. It's basically, it's not perfectly overhead, but because of that it's stretched, so it's actually wider than it needs to be. But the really interesting thing about it is if you look at the image, you can see that the face, like other objects, seems to have a round platform that it sits on. It may be a little too subtle to see with the projector, but it looks awesome on my computer. Hoagland also did some symmetry work. So the argument was, how much time have I got? I gotta really show it up here, don't I? Yeah, no, I'm good still. I have 4 minutes. I can get through another 50 slides in 4 minutes. Hoagland took the original Viking data and he did symmetry work with it because he said, you know, maybe it's not supposed to have been a human face. Maybe it's half human and half something else. And when he did the work, at the Viking stuff, this is what he got. He got some sort of primitive hominid, and then he got this one right here, which looks like lion, right? Anybody not see the lion there? If you do, you get downgraded. In the later images, same thing, same basic appearance. The shading is different, but you have this sort of humanoid face and this lion-looking face. This is an example of stuff that NASA did. This is NASA's official version of the face on Mars. Does it look anything like the face on Mars? No, because you know why? Because it's upside down, it's backwards, it's stretched laterally, and in other words, these lines were perfectly straight in reality, but in the image they go off on a tangent. This is what these are the links that they will go to keep you from seeing what's there. What's so terrifying about this? They also compared the face on Mars to Middle Butte Mesa, which is in, I think, Idaho. This is Middle Butte Mesa. This is the face on Mars. Do they really look the same to you? They don't look the same to me at all. This is another Mars Global Surveyor image of the face where you can again see that there's a couple of eye sockets that are sort of lined up. The same height on the face. There's nostrils in the nose. There's kind of a mouth that goes through. But this was the most interesting image that we've got. This is one Hoagie put together. It was a nighttime infrared color infrared image of the face. Pre-dawn, about 4:30 in the morning. In other words, before the sun had even risen, this picture was taken from orbit. And when we looked at the image, what you saw was this stuff on the right side, the damaged side or the lion side. See that colory pattern there? That's all authentic color that hasn't been enhanced at all. And it has this sort of geometric panel look to it. Here's the actual original photo. See, panel, panel, panel. Now, the only way virtually at night that it could be reflecting that much light. It's actually reflecting back over 90% of the light that was available at the time would be if it was metallic. Not stone, not rock, not limestone. It has to be metallic to be that reflective. Here's another version where you can again see the pattern. I hope you can see the pattern of geometric stuff. And again, this is lined up with the edges of the face on Mars, not with the scan of the image. North is that direction. This is all lined up with the face. It's rotated for this image. So as you begin to look at this part of it and you start looking at the actual visual images of the face, what you can see is, see that little pattern right there? Kind of looks like that. There's some subtle stuff there. So I started digging into this. This is Mars Global Surveyor. This is Mars Odyssey. You start lining them up. This is the second symmetry of the DNM. I should have had that in here earlier. This is the second symmetry that it has. But as we started looking at newer images of the face, ones from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which could get all the way down to 2 meters per pixel or better, that's good enough to see this room. Good enough to see that this room is occupied. We'd be blurry, but we'd be there. You start to look at the details of the face. And again, what you see is, it may look like a jumble to you, but I look at this and I see, wow, I see architecture. Okay? Let me show you. Wow. This is a wall sticking up, see? There's a hole in it. Goes around that way. Here's another wall sticking up, kind of an arch. Here's another wall. 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees. Another room, another wall. Nothing in that image right there. Nothing in that image is natural. Nothing. Here's an example that Hoagie did. I think it's a great example. It's a tipped over building. See this thing is tipped over building, square. Here's another part of the face. See this? Again, all 90 degrees. Walls. Eroded, exposed walls. Here's an example of other parts of the face on Mars. Look at this right here. Parallel, parallel, parallel. This is a Roman ruin from Hadrian's Wall. It's in better shape than this, but this is only a couple thousand years old, and this is probably 500,000 to 1.5 million years old. Again, repeating geometric patterns all over it. So when you look at the face up close, it looks artificial. When you look at it from far away, it looks artificial. Got to pound through this. This is a really extreme close-up of some of this stuff. And actually, in reality, it shouldn't be this blurry. Because of the quality of the camera, it should look better than this. It should be sharper than this. This is well below the limits of resolution of the camera. So some spiry stuff sticking up there, it's just, to me, it freaks me out. Again, more examples of this compared with Earth-based ruins. And here's one of my favorite things I found near the end of the book. It doesn't look like a lot, does it? But then you start to notice the pattern. And where I want, this is on the face on Mars on the right-hand side, or the lion side. What I want you to notice is right here. Sort of a crosshatch pattern, or can you actually even see that with this projector? I don't know. Yeah, you can kind of get it. See this little cellular kind of pattern right here? Cells, cells, square, square, cell, 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 cell. And then on the inside here, right? So this was a roof, and it collapsed in. This is the support structure for this area, and the roof collapsed inside right there. It just kind of bent over and caved in. And this stuff is still exposed. This is the outside wall, this is the outside, this is the inside, and it's bent over. It reminded me of, this is a little bit more contrast. Hopefully that's not too subtle. And it reminded me of just this. Here's a stadium with the roof collapsed. Notice the same pattern of stuff. This is a signature of artificiality. This pattern and this pattern. That's construction. Bent over, collapsed, bent over, collapsed. So where we're left is that this thing, in my opinion, is artificial and is the key to figuring out the fact that everything on Mars, not everything, but everything we've shown you on Mars, I think is artificial structure. And what that means is that somebody built this stuff. There was an advanced civilization on the planet, and they lived on that planet for a long time, or on the moon that is Mars. They've now gone. The question is, what happened to them? We can pretty clearly discern at this point that Mars was in orbit around a much larger planet. That planet was destroyed. The civilization on the surface of Mars probably went underground. Unfortunately, the underground stuff that I've got from infrared is going to have to go in Ancient Aliens on Mars 2, but because we ran out of space in Ancient Aliens on Mars 1. But the question is, why? Everybody keeps asking me, I've gotten several questions, why don't they just tell us the truth about this stuff? Because the truth would seem, at least in my opinion, to be fairly obvious, that this stuff is artificial. The answer is probably here. Jack Kirby is pretty well known as a guy who has created a lot of comic book characters. He created the Fantastic Four, he created the Silver Surfer. Anybody else famous he created? He didn't do the Hulk, did he? Because the Hulk is like the suckiest superhero of them all. Try to make the movie twice, and it's like people are like, the Hulk sucks. You've had 3 Hulks. That's how bad it is. Actors don't even want to be the Hulk again after they've been the Hulk once. Let's face it, Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno were the best Hulks. But in 1958, he created a comic book called The Face on Mars. Now, I've talked to people who say Kirby didn't know anybody at NASA. I've talked to people that say Kirby knew all kinds of people at NASA. But in 1958, he created a comic book called The Face on Mars. And in that comic book, the first expedition to the planet Mars discovers a giant sculpted human face. So again, we have this repeating pattern of faces. We have this weird Voldemort face from 1924. We have The Face on Mars and Viking. And in between there, we have The Face on Mars comic book by Jack Kirby, who supposedly doesn't know anything. What happens in the story is that this astronaut falls into the eyeball. On the right side, of course, where we can see the eyeball. He falls inside. And when he falls there, he sees this pattern of stuff start to emerge around him. What happens is there's this whole display, like a 3D movie, of the history of the people that lived there. And the people that lived there are a race of peaceful giants. Like, I don't know, maybe the Anunnaki? Does that ring a bell to anybody? And then, all of a sudden, their world is devastated by a war with these very strange-looking, mechanical-like beings. They look to me like robots. Like, maybe they were mining the planet next to them, they were using machines, and maybe their machines got too smart, like Battlestar Galactica. I'm just speculating here. And they had to fight them off. And what eventually happens is that the beings decide, and notice that they say that they were gathered in a chamber right here. They say they were gathered in a chamber before a chart showing the planets of the solar system. The man was pointing to a large world, the home of the enemy. Okay? So let's look at this real closely. I gotta get out here so I can put the arrow of this on the right thing. The home of the enemy. Okay, so maybe Mercury, maybe Venus, maybe Earth, maybe Mars. No, it's way too big for Mars. Or maybe this is Mars, this is Earth, this is Venus, and this is Maldek, or Phaeton, one of the missing planets of the solar system. And what he's saying is, he's pointing to a planet between Mars and Jupiter, but there isn't any such world. There's only an asteroid belt, right? But apparently what they're telling him is that at this time there was. So their solution to the war is that they first had to move underground to survive, and then they had to sacrifice one of their own, sacrificed himself, flew in a rocket, and blew up the planet of the enemy. And when that happened, the surface of Mars became devastated. It was devastated by the war, and it was devastated by the destruction of the planet. It's basically pretty much the theoretical or speculative scenario I laid out for you today in a comic book from 1958, 28 years, right? 58, just no, 18 years before the discovery of the actual face on Mars. Now, some people think that's a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. So what I think this is trying to tell us is, in fact, that we have some relation to these guys. We have some relation to the Martians. That Sitchin's Anunnaki may in fact have been our ancestors, but they may in fact have not come from Nibiru, but came from Mars. Remember, the word Nibiru means the planet of the crossing. People have assumed that means a celestial crossing, the crossing of the great celestial sky, the crossing of Orion, something like that. What if it means the place where we were crossed with them? The original Sumerian version of the Bible, of Genesis, does not say, I shall make man in my own image. It says, we shall make man in our own image. So I suspect, and this is what I'm going to get into with Ancient Aliens on Mars too, is the possibility that, in fact, we are the Martians. Sitchin's Anunnaki are actually our ancestors, just as he says, and that ultimately Nibiru is not some rogue planet that comes through here and topples our poles and destroys our world. It's Mars. That Mars might be the planet of the crossing. That may be the place that we actually came from. Okay, that's it. I gotta shut up now. Any questions? Anybody have a question? Shoot.
Is there a comic online?
Yeah, it's actually in. I think it's on my Picasso web album. Oh, I should tell you guys where to go. I had some books here. You can get them obviously on Amazon.com. And if you want one autographed, just buy it to Amazon.com. On Amazon.com, I have links on my webpage. It's mikebara.blogspot.com. Just search under Mike Bara, B-A-R-A, and it'll pop up as the first site on Google. And go there. And if you order a book. There, you can send it to the shipping address that's listed on my website, and then I'll just personalize it for you and mail it back to you. So, but there's also on there, there's a photo page. It says photos. So all the photos from the books are there, and I believe I put the comic on there, but if I haven't, I will do it when I get back home. I'll double check that. Let's go quick there. Yeah.
How big is the face on Mars?
Well, it's about 1.5 miles long by about 1 mile across. It's big. It's enormous. Yeah.
Back a number of years ago when I was talking